You won't believe what happened. I was at the cash register, counting coins while the hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence of the supermarket. Suddenly, Susan appeared beside me with that stern look she always has when she wants something. From me. "Claire, we need to talk," she said, and I already knew it wasn't good news. My heart started beating faster, as if I could sense the blow before she even opened her mouth. She took me to that small, stuffy room in the back, where the smell of stale coffee and wet paper dominates the air. Sitting behind the desk, she didn't even try to hide it. "We're going to adjust your hours." My hands started to sweat. "What? Why?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She avoided my eyes. "We have no other choice." At that moment, I felt like the floor had collapsed beneath my feet. There, in that cramped room, I decided that this wasn't going to stand. Sign up now to follow my journey of twists and turns, secret strategies, and how I turned the tables on someone who thought they had all the power. Here you'll see how patience and intelligence can change everything, and maybe learn something for your own life. My name is Claire, and I'm the kind of person who always tries to do everything right. I've worked at the Bendigo supermarket for almost 10 years. I know every aisle like the back of my hand, every regular customer by name, and even the times when the shelves need to be restocked. I'm not just an employee, I'm part of the place. I've always been dedicated, punctual, and willing to help. But that's never been enough for Susan. Susan has been my manager for 5 years. She has this attitude that says, "I'm in charge, here," but in reality, she only cares about what benefits her. She's manipulative, selfish, and will do anything to protect her position. If you could smell favoritism in the air, it would be her perfume. She acts like she's untouchable, like no one can question her decisions. Because, well, who would? Until now, I had done nothing but swallow my frustrations. And then there's Emily, her niece, a spoiled 22-year-old who barely knows where the stockroom is, let alone how to run a supermarket. Susan brought her here without consulting anyone, saying it was a learning opportunity. The only thing Emily learned was how to make mistake after mistake while the rest of us cleaned up her messes. And now, to make matters worse, she was stealing my work hours as if they were hers by right. Henry also comes into this story. He's been working in the meat department longer than anyone can remember. He's a quiet man, but when he speaks, everyone listens. He hates injustice, especially when it comes from above. He was the one who first warned me about Susan's plans. "She's using you, Claire," he said once while cutting meat behind the counter. "Don't let them do that." At the time, I ignored him. But now, with everything that's happened, I realize he was right. Each of these characters played a crucial role in this journey. Susan, with her selfishness and abuse of power, forced me to act. Emily, with her incompetence and arrogance, showed me exactly the kind of person Susan valued. And Henry, with his quiet wisdom, gave me the push I needed to start changing things. These three shaped my path, even if none of them knew it at the time. But in the end, I am the protagonist of this story. I, Claire, the woman who decided she would no longer be walked all over, who would turn her indignation into strategy, her anger into strength, and her patience into power. And you'll see how it all began to take shape in the next few chapters. The Bendigo supermarket has a smell that never leaves your clothes. It's a mixture of fresh bread coming out of the bakery oven and industrial cleaning products, the kind that sting your nose if you breathe too hard. The fluorescent lights above the shelves buzz constantly, as if tired of illuminating the same place day after day. Sometimes, when it's very quiet in the aisles, you can hear the distant sound of the freezer freezing vegetables or the metallic noise of the automatic doors opening and closing non-stop. The aisles are long and meticulously organized, but there's always something out of place. A box of cereal turned upside down here, a misplaced price tag there. The floor is waxed every day, so sometimes I slip a little when I walk too fast. And of course, there's the cold. The air conditioning doesn't seem to have an off button. Even with my long-sleeved uniform, I feel my arms go cold as I push the restocking cart. The back room, where Susan called me on that fateful day, is even worse. It's small and stuffy, with walls covered in old notices and an old wooden table that creaks when you rest your elbows on it. The smell in there is different, reheated coffee mixed with wet paper, because someone always spills something and no one cleans it up properly. The tiny window barely lets in any natural light, so we depend on that yellowish light bulb that flickers from time to time, as if it too is about to give up. Outside, Bendigo is a quiet town, the kind where everyone knows everyone else. But inside the supermarket, the pace is different. Customers rush through the aisles, their carts squeaking under the weight of their groceries. Children run between the shelves, shouting as their parents try to restrain them. At the checkout, the sound of coins falling onto the metal tray echoes loudly, along with the repetitive beep of the barcode scanner. All of this creates a strange atmosphere. Familiar, but impersonal. It's as if the supermarket is a giant machine, and we are just interchangeable parts. Except I knew that wasn't the case. I felt every detail, every change in the environment, as if it were part of me. Maybe that's why I noticed so quickly when things started to go off the rails. And maybe that's why I decided I wouldn't let this place swallow me up. When Susan called me into that stuffy room and dropped the bomb about my work hours, I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. She didn't even try to hide it. There were no vague excuses or reasonable explanations. Just a cold stare, as if I were invisible, and a short sentence. "We're going to adjust your hours." And then she walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the weight of those words. I sat in the hard chair for a moment, trying to process what had happened. I had been working there for almost a decade. A decade. I knew where every product was. I knew the regular customers by name. I helped new employees learn the ropes. I had always been dedicated, always loyal. And now, out of the blue, my hours were being cut in half. It was absurd. Not only was it unfair, it was completely insensitive. How would I pay my bills? How would I keep my life together? But what really got to me was the feeling that there was something bigger going on here. Susan wasn't the type to make decisions without a selfish motive, so I started paying attention. Over the next few days, I observed everything around me. I saw how Emily, her niece, seemed to be getting more hours, even though she was inexperienced and constantly making mistakes. I saw how Susan turned a blind eye to the problems Emily caused, while criticizing every little mistake the other employees made. And I saw how all of us who really worked hard were being pushed aside. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about favoritism. Susan was using her power to benefit her own family, even if it hurt the rest of us. It was as if she thought no one would question her decisions, that everyone would just accept them because she had the title of manager. But she was wrong. At first I was furious. I wanted to confront her, yell at her, demand justice. But after a few minutes of thinking, I realized that wouldn't solve anything. Susan wasn't the kind of person who would admit her mistakes or change her mind. She only cared about herself. If I wanted to turn this situation around, I would have to be smart. I would have to play her game, but better. I started observing Susan and Emily's weaknesses. I saw how Emily stumbled through the simplest tasks. She forgot to restock important shelves, dropped boxes on the floor during her shift, and even once knocked over a whole stack of soup cans right in front of an angry customer. Susan always covered for her, but the other employees started to notice. The murmurs in the hallways grew louder, and I knew I could use that to my advantage. I decided that instead of complaining or fighting, I would show my worth. I started volunteering for difficult tasks, especially those that no one else wanted to do. I began arriving early and leaving late, even though my hours were reduced. When someone needed help, I was there. I became friends with Henry, who couldn't stand seeing Susan favoring Emily anymore. He started to openly support me in conversations with other coworkers. But most importantly, I kept my cool. I didn't show my anger or frustration. I smiled at Susan whenever I saw her, pretending everything was fine. Inside, though, I was planning every step. I knew that if I kept this up, Susan would eventually fall into her own trap. And when that happened, I would be ready to take control. The initial conflict was clear. Susan was underestimating me, pushing me aside to protect her. Spoiled niece, but she had no idea what I was capable of. I wasn't just going to fight it. I was going to turn this injustice into my greatest opportunity. When the changes to my hours began to take effect, I felt the weight of every lost minute. The first impact was on my wallet. My energy bill was overdue, and I could barely cover the basics: groceries, transportation, rent. I had to make tough choices, like skipping breakfast to save a few bucks. But that wasn't the worst of it. It was the feeling of being erased, as if my hard work and dedication were worth nothing. Every time I walked into the supermarket, I saw Emily taking my place on the shelves or at the checkout, making mistakes I would never make. And Susan? She pretended everything was normal, as if ignoring the problem would make it go away. I tried to confront her once, right after she officially announced that Emily would be taking over some of my tasks. I walked into the back room with my heart racing, trying to stay calm. "Susan," I began, trying to sound firm. "I need to understand why my hours are being cut while Emily is being given more responsibilities." She didn't even look up from her computer. "It's a management decision, Claire," she replied, her voice cold. "It has nothing to do with you." That infuriated me. What do you mean it had nothing to do with me? Of course it did, but I quickly realized that arguing with her would get me nowhere. Susan wasn't the type to admit her mistakes or even listen to anyone question her decisions. Leaving there frustrated was difficult, but it was also a moment of clarity. I needed to find another way to deal with this situation. Yelling or begging wouldn't solve anything. It was time to be strategic. I started watching Emily even more closely. It didn't take long to notice that she was overwhelmed and failing miserably. One morning during rush hour, she dropped an entire shelf of soup cans on the floor right in front of a customer. The metallic clang echoed down the aisle, and the man was furious. "Is this some kind of joke?" he yelled, while Emily stammered out apologies, not knowing what to do. Susan came running to put out the fire, but we all saw it. It was her fault. Everyone knew Emily wasn't ready for that level of responsibility. That's when I decided to take action. If Susan wanted to favor Emily, I would use that against her. I started to stand out by taking on the most challenging tasks and helping other employees whenever possible. When Henry came to complain about Emily messing up the meat inventory, I immediately offered to help. I stayed late to make sure the shelves were organized and the fresh products were stocked correctly. Little by little, people started to notice. The whispers in the hallways grew louder. "Claire is saving us," someone said once, and I smiled discreetly, knowing I was building something important. But there were times when I felt the weight of the situation. Sometimes, when I came home exhausted and hungry, I thought about giving up. Why keep trying so hard when Susan seemed untouchable? Then I remembered how she treated me as if I were invisible. I remembered the angry customers, the frustrated coworkers, and I knew that this injustice couldn't last forever. My biggest test came on a particularly chaotic day. A customer complained directly to management because Emily had mixed up their delivery order. Susan called an emergency meeting with the entire team. "We're compromising our reputation," she said, trying to sound firm, but I could see the nervousness in her eyes. When she asked who could help fix the situation, I raised my hand immediately. "I can take care of it," I said, looking directly at her. Susan hesitated, but she had no other choice. I knew this was the first real step toward proving my worth. I fixed the customer's order in record time, delivering everything personally and making sure he was satisfied. He even praised the service, saying he would shop with us again. When I returned to the supermarket, Susan gave me a strange look, a mixture of surprise and irritation. But I didn't care anymore. That small victory was just the beginning. Tante Dain continued to make mistakes, and I continued to shine where they failed. I was planting the seeds for something much bigger. The first crisis was painful, yes. Losing my hours and seeing Emily taking my place still hurts to this day. But it was also the moment I realized that Susan had completely underestimated who I was. And that would be her biggest mistake. After weeks of working my hardest, I began to see the first results. Susan had no choice but to acknowledge my work, at least on the surface. One day, during one of our morning meetings, she did something I never expected. She praised my dedication. "Claire has been an example to us all," she said, with a fake smile on her face. "She's always willing to help and solve problems." On the outside, I kept my expression calm and professional. But on the inside, a small triumph exploded inside me. It was as if I had planted a seed and was finally starting to see the first sprouts. For a moment, I thought maybe things could go back to normal. Susan seemed to be softening. She even asked me to lead an important project, reorganizing the inventory to improve efficiency. It was a huge task, but also a perfect opportunity to further prove my worth. I accepted without hesitation, of course. I spent days planning every detail, talking to employees about their difficulties, and finding practical solutions. Henry was a great ally in this. He helped me catalog the heaviest products and suggested adjustments to the layout of the meat department. When we finally implemented the changes, the impact was immediate. The time spent on restocking was cut in half, and customers noticed the difference. Even Susan had to admit that the new system was better. That brief sense of victory began to create a false sense of security in me. Maybe I could keep this up, I thought. Proving my worth little by little, winning small victories until Susan realized I was indispensable. Maybe I didn't even need to take more drastic measures. After all, Emily was still making mistakes, dropping merchandise, mixing up orders, upsetting customers, and those slip-ups were slowly undermining her position. I just needed to stay focused and keep shining. But then came the freezer incident. One morning, just before the supermarket opened, we discovered that one of the industrial freezers had failed during the night. All the fresh meat was ruined, hundreds of pounds lost. Susan panicked, rushing around trying to figure out what had happened. That's when Emily, nervous and stammering, admitted that she had forgotten to check the equipment the night before. "I thought someone else had done it," she mumbled, avoiding everyone's gaze. Susan was furious. "This is unacceptable," she shouted, pointing at Emily. But curiously, she didn't blame her alone. In front of the entire team, Susan said, "We have to be more responsible. This can't happen again." It was obvious she was trying to protect her niece by placing some of the blame on the rest of us. The tension among the employees grew. Some began to mutter under their breath about favoritism, while others simply shook their heads in frustration. That moment should have been a wake-up call for me. Susan was trying to cover up Emily's mistakes once again, but now the cost was much higher. It wasn't just cans of soup or mixed-up orders. It was real money, a lot of money, going down the drain. And although I was gaining recognition, I realized that it wasn't enough. Susan was still in control, still protecting Emily at all costs. My false sense of security quickly disappeared. I knew I had to act faster and harder. I started thinking bigger. If Susan was willing to sacrifice so much to protect her niece, then I would need to strike where it really mattered, her credibility as a manager. That brief truce, that empty compliment, meant nothing. It was time to accelerate my plan. The second crisis began with a storm. Literally. Bendigo isn't the kind of place that usually experiences severe weather, but that week, torrential rain fell on the city without warning. The supermarket was packed with customers rushing to do last-minute shopping before the streets became impassable. It was chaos everywhere. Shopping carts bumping into each other, huge lines at the registers, and employees running back and forth trying to keep everything running. And in the midst of all this confusion, another monumental mistake happened. This time, impossible to hide. Emily was in charge of supervising stock replenishment during peak hours. Susan had insisted on this, even though she knew Emily didn't have enough experience to handle so much pressure. I watched from afar as Emily tried to coordinate the team, clearly lost in the chaos. She shouted contradictory orders, forgot to check which products were actually out of stock, and ended up further disrupting the workflow. Even Henry lost his patience with her. "You're doing everything wrong," he growled when Emily told him to restock the beverage aisle while the meat section was completely empty. It was a disaster waiting to happen. And then came the fateful moment. While helping to organize the checkout line, I heard a loud crash coming from the back of the supermarket. I ran there with other employees and found a surreal scene. One of the industrial shelves had collapsed, scattering hundreds of cans and packages across the wet floor. Rainwater was pouring in through the poorly sealed automatic doors, turning the place into something resembling a makeshift swimming pool. Customers began to move away in fear, some complaining loudly about the safety of the place. Susan appeared, running, her face red with anger. "What happened here?" she demanded, her eyes scanning the chaos in front of her. Before anyone could answer, Emily stammered, nervously pointing to the fallen shelf. I just wanted to adjust a few things and then..." Her voice faltered. We all knew it wasn't an accident. Emily had overloaded the shelf with heavy products, ignoring basic organization rules. Now, in addition to the material damage, we had a major safety risk on our hands. That's when I felt something inside me change. This mess wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a direct reflection of Susan's poor decisions. She had put Emily in a position she wasn't prepared for, and now the entire supermarket was paying the price. I couldn't just stand there and watch anymore. I took a deep breath and walked over to Susan, who was still trying to comprehend the extent of the damage. "This needs to be taken care of now," I said, my voice firm as it had ever been. "I'll lead the cleanup and make sure no one gets hurt." She hesitated for a second, but finally agreed. She knew she had no other choice. Over the next few minutes, I took charge of the situation. I divided the team into groups. Some took care of removing the damaged products, others dried the floor to prevent slipping, and still others helped rebuild the shelf. We worked quickly and quietly, but the atmosphere was tense. Every glance, exchange between employees said the same thing. This couldn't go on. By the time we finally managed to restore some order to the environment, it was late at night. The last customers had left, and the supermarket was almost empty. But the crisis didn't end there. The next day, Susan called another meeting. She looked exhausted, and for the first time since I had met her, I noticed a hint of vulnerability in her expression. "We need to learn from our mistakes," she said, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. "Let's improve our processes." Then came the bombshell. She blamed all of us for the incident, except Emily. "We're a team, and everyone has a responsibility here," she declared, avoiding any mention of her niece's disastrous role. For the room fell silent, but you could feel the anger in the air. That attitude was the last straw. I realized that Susan wasn't going to change on her own. She would continue to protect Emily, even if it cost the entire supermarket its credibility. But I also realized something more important. I was no longer the same Claire who accepted injustice silently. I had earned the respect of the team, proven my worth time and time again, and now I was ready to take the next step. I decided that it wasn't enough to just shine. I needed to expose the truth. I started documenting every mistake Emily made, every wrong decision Susan made. I was building a case against them, and this time there would be no escape. The third crisis came at a time when I was starting to believe that everything could work out. I had spent weeks documenting every mistake Emily had made and every questionable decision Susan had taken. I had talked to Henry and a few other key employees, gathering their experiences to strengthen my case. I was ready to confront Susan, but I didn't know exactly how or when I would do it. Then something happened that forced me to make a difficult and quick decision. It was a normal morning at the supermarket when we got the news. There would be a surprise inspection by headquarters. The board was concerned about rumors of mismanagement and wanted to see for themselves that the supermarket was operating according to standards. Susan turned pale as soon as she heard. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, pacing back and forth in the back room. "We have nothing to hide." But we all knew that statement was a blatant lie. The place was riddled with problems: poorly stocked products, inconsistent records, and even equipment safety hazards, all things Susan had deliberately ignored, while focusing on protecting Emily. That's when Henry came to me during the break. He looked nervous. "Claire, we need to do something," he said, lowering his voice. "If the inspection finds all this, they'll blame us too, not just Susan." He was right. If management found out about the chaos Susan had allowed to happen, everyone would pay the price. Many of the employees had families to support, bills to pay. They didn't deserve to be punished for something they didn't cause. But at the same time, this could be my chance to expose Susan once and for all. It was a moral dilemma I hadn't expected to face so soon. On the one hand, I could use the inspection to prove my point. I would present my notes, point out the mistakes made under Susan's supervision, and finally put an end to this absurd situation. On the other hand, doing so would mean risking not only Susan's job, but also Emily's, and perhaps even that of innocent colleagues who depended on their salaries to survive. Did I have the right to put so many people at risk just to get my revenge? I spent hours thinking about it. As I cleaned the shelves and helped customers, my mind raced through possibilities. Could there be another way? A way to resolve this without causing so much damage? That's when I remembered something Henry had once said. People hate favoritism, but they respect those who act with honesty. Maybe I didn't have to play dirty to win. Maybe I could use the truth, and only the truth, to change things. I decided to proceed with caution. On the day of the inspection, I prepared a detailed report, but focused only on the objective aspects: the safety risks, the financial losses, and the minimum quality standards that were being violated. I didn't include anything personal against Susan or Emily. When the inspectors arrived, I discreetly asked to speak with them privately. I calmly explained what had been happening, presented concrete evidence, and made it clear that the team was doing the best it could within the limitations imposed by management. The inspectors were impressed with my organization and transparency. "You're going above and beyond the call of duty," one of them commented, looking at me with curiosity. "Yes," I replied simply. "I just want this place to work well, for everyone." I didn't need to say anything else. At the end of the day, the inspectors called Susan into a private meeting. I watched through the glass door as she tried to defend herself. But it was too late. The evidence was indisputable. She left the room visibly shaken, avoiding eye contact with anyone. She knew her position was in jeopardy, but she had no idea what would come next. Although I knew I had made the right choice, acting ethically and responsibly, that decision was not easy. I had put not only my reputation on the line, but also the trust I had built with the team. Now I had to make sure it was all worth it. The fourth crisis came like a giant wave, fast and relentless, threatening to swallow everything I had built up until then. The inspection had exposed Susan's flaws, but she was not willing to accept defeat quietly. Instead, she decided to play her last card, create even more chaos to divert the board's attention and try to save her position. And of course, that meant making things worse for all of us. In the days following the inspection, Susan began implementing drastic changes at the supermarket, or at least she tried to. She reorganized work schedules without consulting anyone, cutting the hours of experienced employees even further and distributing them among Emily and a few others she had handpicked. It seemed like she was trying to assemble a small army of loyal allies to protect her reign. But her decisions were irrational and inconsistent, leaving the place even more chaotic. Customers started complaining again, and the team was on the verge of collapse. That's when we received another bombshell. Headquarters was sending a temporary supervisor to monitor our operations while they evaluated whether Susan should remain as manager. This increased the pressure on all of us. The supervisor would arrive in just 3 days, and the atmosphere in the supermarket was tense. Susan paced back and forth like a caged lioness, shouting absurd orders and blaming anyone who crossed her path. "This is your fault," she yelled one morning, pointing at Henry and me during a meeting. "If you had done your jobs better, none of this would be happening." That was too much for me. I knew Susan was trying to blame others to save herself, but those words hit me hard. Not because they were true, they weren't, but because they showed how low she was willing to go to maintain her power. At that moment, I realized I couldn't just wait for the board to fix everything on its own. If we wanted to get out of this situation intact, I needed to take immediate action. I decided to call a secret meeting with some key employees. Henry was there, of course, along with Maria from the deli department and James, who worked in inventory. We gathered in the break room after hours, away from Susan's prying eyes. "We can't go on like this," I began, my voice firm but gentle. "Susan is completely losing control, and it's going to end up hurting us even more." Everyone agreed, nodding silently. "We need to show the supervisor that we're capable of running this place without her." The plan was risky, but necessary. Over the next 2 days, each of us took on extra responsibilities, making sure that every area of the supermarket was running smoothly before the supervisor arrived. Henry organized the meat department, Maria adjusted the refrigerators to prevent further breakdowns, and James led the stock team in a thorough cleaning. I focused on supervising everything, making sure no detail was overlooked. It was like setting the stage for a play. Only this time, the future of our jobs depended on the outcome. But just when everything seemed to be under control, unexpected complications arose. The day before the supervisor arrived, Emily made another monumental mistake. She mixed up an important delivery order, sending frozen products to the wrong warehouse. By the time we discovered it, it was too late to fix. The products had spoiled, causing a huge loss. Susan panicked again, calling Emily in for a private conversation. I heard part of the discussion through the back room door. "You're ruining everything!" Susan shouted, her voice full of frustration. "I did everything for you. And now, this?" That scene tore me apart. As much as I hated to admit it, I saw something human in Susan for the first time. The desperation of someone who finally realized they had lost the game. But I also understood that if we didn't act fast, all the progress we had made would be destroyed. I decided to confront her one last time. I walked into the room without knocking, interrupting her outburst. "Enough, Susan," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You need to stop protecting Emily and start thinking about what's best for this place. We're trying to help, but you're getting in the way." She stared at me, surprised and furious. For a moment, I thought she was going to fire me right there and then. But then something changed in her eyes. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was resignation. She didn't say anything, just lowered her head and left the room. The next day, the supervisor arrived. He spent hours inspecting the supermarket, asking questions and observing every detail. When he was done, he called Susan in for a private meeting. I stood outside, waiting anxiously. Minutes later, he opened the door and asked to speak with me. "Claire," he said, with a tone of approval in his voice. "You've been mentioned repeatedly as the person who keeps this place running. What do you think needs to be done to resolve this situation?" This was my chance. I took a deep breath and replied sincerely, "This supermarket needs fair and efficient leadership. Someone who knows the operations and values the team." He nodded slowly, as if he already knew the answer. At that moment, I knew the end was near, and that I needed to be ready for what came next. The air in the supermarket was charged with electricity, as if a storm were about to explode over our heads. The conversation with the supervisor had been brief, but meaningful. He didn't say anything definitive, just asked me to prepare a report, detailing my suggestions for improving the supermarket's operations, and fast. "We'll make a decision soon," he warned before leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew that this was the decisive moment, the point where all the months of patience, strategy, and hard work finally converged. But I also knew that there was still a lot at stake. Over the next few days, Susan seemed to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She walked around the supermarket like a shadow, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Her orders were confusing and contradictory, causing even Emily to start questioning her. Once, I heard my niece whisper as she was stocking shelves, "Auntie, what's going on? You seem lost." Susan simply ignored her, but for the first time, I noticed something different about her. Vulnerability. It was as if she knew her time. There was running out, but she was still desperately trying to hold on. Meanwhile, I worked tirelessly to make sure everything was perfect before the supervisor's final visit. Henry and I led a silent task force, adjusting every detail, impeccably, organized shelves, reviewed inventory, checked equipment, and even deep cleaning areas that usually went unnoticed. Maria brought fresh flowers to decorate the main entrance, and James suggested putting up friendly posters in the aisles, highlighting promotions and special offers. We were transforming the supermarket into something that reflected our collective effort, not Susan's selfish whims. But the tension was mounting with every passing minute. One morning, as I was reviewing my report for the 10th time, I noticed that Susan was watching me from afar. Her gaze was intense, almost piercing, as if she were trying to uncover some secret hidden between the lines of my behavior. She waited until I finished organizing some papers in the back room, then walked in, closing the door behind her. "What are you up to, Claire?" she asked, her voice low but full of venom. "Do you think you can just take everything away from me?" I took a deep breath, keeping my cool. "I'm not plotting anything, Susan," I replied, looking her straight in the eye. "I'm just doing my job, something you should have done a long time ago." She hesitated for a second, surprised by my bluntness. Then her expression hardened again. "You don't know what you're talking about," she growled. "I built all this. I'm the reason this place works." "It worked poorly," I interrupted, my own frustration beginning to boil over. "You protected Emily, ignored the employees, and put everyone at risk. You didn't keep this place running. We did. And now it's time for someone to take control." For a moment, there was silence. Susan stared at me, her eyes flashing with anger, and maybe even a little fear. She knew I was right, but she would never admit it out loud. Instead, she turned abruptly and stormed out of the room, slamming the door hard enough to make the walls shake. Now, with the supervisor about to return, every movement seemed amplified. The minutes dragged on like hours, and I could feel the weight of every choice I had made up to this point pressing down on my shoulders. I knew I had earned the respect of the team and proven my worth time and time again. But would that be enough? What if the supervisor decided to give Susan another chance? Or worse, promote someone from outside the company, completely ignoring the effort we had all put in? These doubts haunted my mind like ghosts, but I couldn't let them paralyze me. I had to keep acting confident, even if I was trembling inside. That's when I decided to make one last crucial alliance. I invited Henry for a private conversation. "If they ask, I need you to tell them the truth," I said, looking him in the eye. "Tell them I'm the right person to lead this place." He smiled slightly and nodded. "They already know that, Claire. What you're doing is undeniable." On the day of the supervisor's final visit, the supermarket was unrecognizable. Everything sparkled, from the aisles to the service counters. The employees were motivated, greeting customers with genuine smiles. Even Emily seemed more humble, helping where she could without causing any trouble. When the supervisor arrived, he was visibly impressed. "This is a different place," he commented as we walked through the aisles. "Someone really put a lot of effort into changing things here." Finally, he called everyone together for a meeting. Susan was there, sitting, silently, her eyes fixed on the floor. The supervisor began by talking about the importance of effective and fair leadership. Every word seemed to weigh a ton in the air. "Claire," he said suddenly, looking directly at me, "many here have mentioned your name as the key to solving the problems in this place. What do you think needs to be done now?" That question was the prelude to the final confrontation, and I knew I would have to answer carefully. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. The time had come. Sign up now to follow the outcome of this story of twists and turns, secret strategies, and how an ordinary woman gained the power that had always belonged to her. You won't want to miss the thrilling climax and conclusion that will make you reflect on justice, revenge, and self-confidence. When my supervisor asked that question, "Claire, what do you think needs to be done now?" I felt as if all my choices, strategies, and sacrifices were converging on that moment. I had two options: speak diplomatically or tell the cold, hard truth. I decided on the latter. I was tired of hiding behind soft words, tired of watching Susan manipulate everything around her without facing the consequences. It was time to lay everything out on the table. "This supermarket needs fair leadership," I began, my voice firm but calm. "Not someone who uses their position to favor family members or protect mistakes, but someone who understands the value of each employee and puts the well-being of the team above personal interests." I looked directly at Susan as I spoke, and saw her eyes widen for a moment, as if she hadn't expected such boldness. But I didn't stop there. In recent months, we've seen a series of serious problems: spoiled products, poorly maintained equipment, disorganized shelves, and dissatisfied customers. Most of these problems could have been avoided with efficient management. I paused to take a breath, noticing that everyone in the room, including the supervisor, was completely attentive. But that wasn't the employees' fault. We did the best we could under the circumstances. The problem was a lack of proper leadership. Henry gave me a discreet look of support, and I felt a warm glow of confidence grow inside me. I continued. "I know this place like the back of my hand. I know its weaknesses and its opportunities. And I know I can do better. Much better. Because I've been doing it for months, even without the official title." My words echoed around the room, leaving a heavy silence in the air. Susan finally reacted. "Are you blaming me for all this?" she asked, her voice rising an octave. "I've been working here for years. I'm the only reason this place is still standing." She tried to sound convincing, but there was something broken in her posture. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by desperation. "You may have been here for years," I replied calmly, "but that doesn't mean you've been acting in the best interests of this place. Protecting Emily at all costs has only hurt everyone, including yourself." Those words hit home. I saw Susan's face pale even more, and even Emily lowered her head, unable to face anyone. The supervisor watched silently, taking notes. When he finally spoke, his voice was neutral but carried a definitive tone. "Susan, Claire has raised important issues that corroborate what we've seen during our evaluation. We need to make a quick and objective decision." He paused before continuing. "Claire, are you prepared to temporarily take over the manager position? We want to evaluate your leadership skills under direct supervision." I felt my heart leap in my chest. It was exactly what I had hoped for, and also much more than I had imagined. Before I could respond, Susan interrupted, her voice trembling. "This is ridiculous. She doesn't have enough experience. You're making a huge mistake." She looked on the verge of a complete breakdown, her hands shaking as she pointed at me. "Experience isn't the only relevant factor," the supervisor replied, remaining calm. "Claire has demonstrated initiative, dedication, and skill in organizing the team during a crisis. That's more valuable than any degree or title." He then looked at me again, waiting for my response. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility fall on my shoulders. "Yes," I replied firmly. "I'm ready." I didn't hesitate for a second. I knew I could do it, not just because I wanted to prove something to Susan, but because I knew I deserved this chance. Susan's expression was indescribable, a mixture of shock, anger, and utter defeat. She mumbled something incoherent before storming out of the room, leaving us all in silence. Emily quickly followed her, muttering apologies to no one in particular. The supervisor dismissed us shortly after, saying that the change would begin immediately. As I walked back to the supermarket floor, I felt the other employees' eyes on me. Some smiled openly, others looked relieved. Henry came up to me and patted me on the back. "You did it, Claire. Finally." His voice was full of pride, and I couldn't help but smile back. But that smile wasn't just one of victory. It was one of relief, of accomplishment, of knowing that I had finally achieved something that should always have been mine. There was still a lot of work ahead, of course. Taking on the role of manager was no guarantee of instant success, but at that moment, I knew I had taken the first real step toward changing everything. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly in control of my destiny. The victory seemed complete, but life has a peculiar way of surprising us when we least expect it. The day after my temporary promotion, the supermarket was in an uproar. The employees moved with more energy, as if they could finally breathe a sigh of relief. I led everything with a renewed sense of purpose, adjusting schedules, organizing meetings, and ensuring that each department ran like clockwork. It seemed that things were falling into place, until something happened that completely changed the course of events. One morning, I received an unexpected call from my supervisor. He asked me to step into his office for a private conversation. When I entered, he was standing with a thick envelope in his hands. "Claire," he began, his expression serious, "before we make any final decisions about your position here, we need to clear up something important." He handed me the envelope, and I opened it hesitantly. Inside were detailed documents, internal, reports from headquarters, email messages, and even phone recordings. Everything pointed to Susan. "These materials were sent anonymously to the board," my supervisor explained. "They show clear evidence of misconduct not only at the supermarket, but also at other branches where Susan has previously worked." My heart raced as I flipped through the papers. There were records of embezzlement, manipulation of overtime, and even cases of bullying documented by former employees. It was a scandal much bigger than I could have imagined. "What does this mean?" I asked, trying to process the magnitude of it all. The supervisor sighed deeply. "It means that Susan will not only be removed from this position, but she will likely face formal disciplinary action. The headquarters is investigating all of her actions over the past few years." I was speechless. I never imagined she was capable of something like this, or maybe I just didn't want to believe it. But then came the twist that really caught me off guard. The supervisor continued, "Due to the seriousness of these allegations, we are accelerating the leadership transition. Claire, you will not only be interim manager, you will be officially promoted to the position of general manager of this supermarket." I felt my world spin. Officially? This wasn't just a temporary opportunity, but a permanent appointment. It all happened so fast that I could barely absorb the news. "We understand that this is a huge responsibility," he added. "But your dedication and ability to handle crises have convinced us that you are the right person for this role. Congratulations." He held out his hand, and I shook it automatically, still trying to comprehend what this meant. When I left the room, all the employees already knew. Someone, probably Henry, had spread the news before I could even announce it. They applauded when they saw me, some even shouting with joy. "You deserve this, Claire," Maria said, emotionally. Even Emily timidly came over to congratulate me, although her gaze still carried a hint of guilt. Despite the euphoria, I couldn't help feeling strange. This turnaround, Susan's complete downfall and my sudden rise, was much bigger than I had planned. Somewhere inside, I felt sorry for her. Not for the loss of her job, but for the weight of the choices that had led her there. She had built her own ruin, brick by brick, until it all came crashing down on her. In the days that followed, I began to implement real changes. I readjusted work schedules, created incentive programs for employees, and even organized small celebrations to celebrate our achievements. The supermarket had never been so vibrant, and I had never felt so fulfilled. But that journey also taught me something profound. True power doesn't come from beating others, but from overcoming your own limitations and doing what's right, even when it's hard. Sign up now to follow this story of courage, strategy, and personal transformation. Discover how an ordinary woman faced enormous challenges, proved her worth, and changed her destiny forever. This is a lesson in justice, resilience, and self-discovery that you won't want to miss. Sitting in that room that once belonged to Susan, now with a sign on the door that read, "General Manager, Claire Bennett," I finally stopped to reflect on everything that had happened. The journey to get there wasn't just about beating Susan or getting a promotion. It was about facing my own fears, doubts, and insecurities. For years, I had accepted injustice in silence, thinking that was my place, that I needed to shrink and swallow my frustrations to survive. But the moment Susan cut my hours without explanation, something inside me changed. I decided I would no longer be invisible. At first, my motivation was clear: revenge. I wanted to prove that she was wrong, that I was better than she could ever imagine. But as the months went by, I realized that this was about more than punishing Susan or Emily. It was about regaining my self-respect. Every time I excelled at a task, every time I helped a colleague or faced a new challenge, I felt a strength growing inside me, a strength I didn't even know I had. I learned that patience and strategy can be powerful weapons, but I also learned something even more important: confidence. Before this whole story, I constantly questioned my abilities. Am I good enough? Do I deserve more? When Susan cut my hours, that little voice inside me screamed no. But instead of letting it get me down, I used it as fuel. I started to observe her weaknesses and turned them into opportunities to prove my worth. It was like playing chess. Every move calculated, every step carefully thought out. In the end, I not only won the game, but I also discovered how resilient I could be. But despite all the victories, there were moments when I doubted myself. When Susan tried to blame us all for the freezer incident, or when Emily made catastrophic mistakes, I was tempted to give up. I thought about going back to the comfort of mediocrity, where no one expected much from me, and I didn't have to fight so hard. It was Henry who made me see clearly. "Claire, you're doing this for others too, not just for yourself." He was right. I wasn't just fighting for my future, but for the future of everyone who depended on that supermarket, and maybe even for Susan's future, who needed to learn her lessons the hard way. Now, sitting in that chair that once represented everything I hated, I realized that I had overcome my biggest internal conflict: the fear of taking responsibility. For a long time, I thought that leadership meant having all the answers, being perfect all the time. But here, in this new role, I understood that leadership is about listening, learning, and growing together with your team. I don't have to have all the solutions right away. I can ask for help. I can admit when I'm wrong. And that doesn't make me weak. It makes me human. I also learned to deal with the guilt that came with victory. Yes, I wanted justice, but I never wanted Susan to fall so hard. The scandal that came to light, the allegations of misconduct at other branches, was devastating. She wasn't just a bad manager. She was someone who used her power to manipulate and systematically harm others. Even so, I thought about her a few times during meetings. I wondered what it must be like for her to face the consequences of her choices. I don't feel sorry for her, but I do feel compassion. Perhaps if she had been different, none of this would have happened. The real triumph, however, was personal growth. Today I look in the mirror and see a strong woman, capable of facing any challenge with courage and intelligence. I know I will still make mistakes. After all, no one is infallible. But I also know that I have the ability to fix them. That certainty does not come from the title on my door, but from within me. I proved to myself that I deserve to be here. Not because I defeated Susan, but because I worked hard, made ethical choices, and never gave up, even when it seemed impossible. And as I organize the team, make plans for the future, and create an environment where everyone feels valued, I realize something extraordinary. This position is not just a reward for my struggle, but an opportunity to do better. To be the kind of leader I always wanted to have. A fair, dedicated, and above all humane person. At the end of this journey, it wasn't just the supermarket that changed. It was me. And that, more than anything else, is what really matters. The weight of the final victory began to slowly settle on my shoulders. Susan had not only been removed from her position, but also suspended from any role within the company while the investigations continued. The supermarket now had a different atmosphere, lighter, as if a huge weight had been lifted from the environment. And me? I was in charge. I officially took over as general manager on a sunny morning, with all the employees gathered in front of the customer service counter. The supervisor came in person to announce the decision to the team, and his words still echo in my memory. Claire has shown that leadership is more than just holding a position. It's about bringing people together, solving problems, and doing what's right, even when it's hard. He smiled at me before handing me the symbolic keys to the office, the ones that opened the back room, where so many bad decisions had been made by Susan. The applause was warm, and some even shouted my name. Maria brought cupcakes decorated with "Congratulations, Claire," written in blue frosting, and Henry gave a short but heartfelt speech. "She fought for us," he said, looking directly at me. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she knew this place could be better. And she proved it. I couldn't hold back the tears at that moment. They weren't tears of pride, but of gratitude for finding allies like Henry, Maria, and so many others who believed in me. In my first days as general manager, I made sure to implement immediate changes. I adjusted work schedules to ensure that no one was unfairly disadvantaged, as I had been. Emily, who was still working with us, received proper training and was placed in a department where her mistakes would not cause major losses. She seemed genuinely grateful for the opportunity to start over, and I decided to give her another chance. Not because she deserved it, but because everyone deserves a second chance. I also created a weekly feedback system where employees could share their concerns or suggestions anonymously. I wanted to make sure that no one ever felt that their voice was ignored, as I had so often felt under Susan's management. In addition, I organized small monthly celebrations to recognize the team's hard work. They seemed like simple gestures, but they made all the difference in the atmosphere at the supermarket. The main conflict, the injustice done to me and the other employees, was resolved once and for all. Susan wasn't coming back, and her reign of favoritism and mismanagement was a thing of the past. But most importantly, I hadn't just earned my place. I had transformed the supermarket into a fairer and more efficient place. Customers began to notice the difference. The shelves were always organized, the employees smiled more, and business increased significantly. We even received compliments in online reviews, something rare in Susan's day. However, the real impact of the changes wasn't just in the numbers or the visible results. It was in the conversations that took place in the aisles during working hours, in the laughter shared, in the break room, and in the collective feeling that we were all building something together. Every employee knew that their work was valued, and this was directly reflected in the quality of service we provided. Still, there were times when I had to face unexpected challenges. Some suppliers questioned my new inventory organization policies, and certain longtime customers complained about changes to the supermarket layout. But unlike what I would have done in the past, I faced these obstacles with calm and determination. I knew that every criticism was an opportunity for growth, both for me and for the business. At the end of my first week as general manager, I gathered the entire team together again. This time, it wasn't to receive congratulations, but to say, thank you. "This place isn't just mine," I said, looking at every face in the room. "It's ours, and we're going to continue making it something we can be proud of." The applause that followed was different from before, more sincere, more heartfelt. It was the sound of a united team, ready to face the future together. When I got home that night, I sat on the porch and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The main conflict had been resolved, and I had emerged not only as a winner, but as someone transformed. I had proven that justice and hard work can prevail, even against the greatest odds. And above all, I had learned that true power comes from within, from confidence in yourself and in the value of collective work. The consequences of that journey were felt not only by me, but by everyone around me. Every character in this story, Susan, Emily, Henry, and even the employees who barely appeared on the scene, was impacted in profound ways by the choices we made and the changes I implemented. Susan disappeared completely from our world. After her official removal from office and the start of internal investigations, she was transferred to another branch in a distant city, where she would be monitored while responding to allegations of misconduct. I heard she was trying to fight it all, but no one believed her anymore. She had lost not only her job, but also any respect she might have earned over the years. Sometimes I wondered how she was coping, whether she felt regret or just anger. But the truth is, I didn't think about her as much as I used to. She no longer occupied space in my mind, because I had bigger things to focus on, building something better. Emily, on the other hand, had a different fate. At first, I thought she would simply leave the supermarket after Susan left. But to my surprise, she decided to stay. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was necessity, but something inside her changed. I put her in the inventory department, away from the spotlight and critical responsibilities, but with room to grow. She started working hard, probably for the first time in her life, and gradually earned the respect of the team. Once, she called me in for a private conversation. "I know I made a lot of mistakes," she said, lowering her eyes, "but I want to do things right now." I didn't know if she had really changed, or if she was just trying to redeem herself, but I decided to give her a chance. After all, everyone deserves a second chance. Henry was the one who flourished the most with the changes. He took on an informal leadership role among the employees, becoming my right-hand man in day-to-day operations. Whenever I needed advice or suggestions, he was there, ready to help. His experience and wisdom were invaluable, and he seemed genuinely happy to finally see the supermarket running as it should. One morning he said to me, "Claire, you've brought justice back to this place, and that means more than any pay raise." It was a compliment I cherish to this day. The other employees also began to shine in new ways. With adjusted schedules and a fairer environment, they felt valued and motivated. Maria, from the deli department, began suggesting creative ideas to promote seasonal products, increasing our sales. James, from the stockroom, led an initiative to reduce waste of perishable goods. Even those who had previously seemed invisible began to stand out. It was as if we had awakened something in each of them, a sense of belonging and purpose. For me, the consequences were the most transformative. I was no longer just Claire, the dedicated employee. Now I was Claire, the leader. This new title came with enormous responsibilities, but also with incredible opportunities. I discovered that being a general manager didn't mean having all the answers, but rather creating a space where people could find their own solutions. I learned to delegate, listen, and trust others, something I never imagined I would do so naturally. My personal life also changed. Before, I would come home exhausted and frustrated, often questioning my worth. Now, I would arrive full of energy, ready to plan the next step. My friends and family noticed the difference. They said I seemed more confident, lighter. And it was true. I had found a strength within myself that I didn't even know existed. When I think about the consequences for all of us, I realize that this story wasn't just about beating Susan or getting a job. It was about growth, individual and collective. Susan lost everything because she didn't know how to lead with integrity. Emily learned that hard work and humility can open doors. Henry found a new purpose. And me? I discovered that we are capable of so much more than we imagine. When we face our fears and fight for what is right, these consequences shape not only the supermarket, but also our lives. And in the end, that's what really matters. This story isn't just about me, Claire, or Susan and her selfish choices. It's about something bigger, something universal. The power of justice, resilience, and the value of doing the right thing, even when it seems impossible. My journey at the supermarket taught me lessons that go far beyond the walls of that place. They are truths that apply to life in any context, at work, in personal relationships, and even within ourselves. Injustice was the trigger for all of this. When Susan cut my hours without explanation, she wasn't just hurting my paycheck, she was attacking something deeper, my dignity, my sense of self-worth. But instead of accepting that injustice as inevitable, I decided to fight back. And that's when I learned one of the biggest lessons of this journey. Silence is not always a virtue. There are times when we need to raise our voices, not just for ourselves, but for everyone else who is also being ignored or harmed. But fighting injustice doesn't mean acting out of anger or revenge. At first, I admit that my motivation was to prove Susan wrong. I wanted her to feel the weight of her bad decisions and see that I was better than she ever imagined. However, throughout this journey, I realized that true strength doesn't come from defeating someone, but from building something better. My victory wasn't just about removing Susan from power. It was about creating an environment where people could thrive without fear of favoritism or manipulation. Justice isn't about punishing others, but about restoring balance. Another central theme in this story is the importance of patience and strategy. I could have yelled, fought, or even quit in a moment of frustration, but instead, I chose to observe, plan, and act calmly. Every step I took was calculated. Every decision was designed to maximize positive impact. This showed me that often, the longest path is the most efficient one. We don't have to react impulsively to challenges. We can turn them into opportunities to grow and evolve. I also learned that leadership is not about control, but about connection. For years, Susan tried to rule through fear and favoritism, and that only led to resentment and chaos. When I took over, I realized that true power lies in bringing people together, in making them feel like they are part of something bigger. A good leader doesn't have to be perfect. They have to be human. They have to listen, learn, and be willing to change. This idea transformed not only the supermarket, but also the way I see my own leadership abilities. Ultimately, this story is about self-discovery. Before all this, I was someone who constantly doubted herself. I thought I deserved less, that I couldn't question other people's decisions. But in facing Susan and all the injustice she represented, I discovered an inner strength I didn't know I had. I learned that we are capable of so much more than we think when we decide to face our fears and fight for what is right. And that lesson will stay with me forever. Today, when I look back, I see that this journey was much more than a dispute over a job. It was proof that justice and hard work can prevail even against the greatest odds. It was a demonstration that when we choose to act with integrity and determination, we can transform not only our own lives, but also the lives of those around us. And in the end, perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. True power comes from within, from trusting who we are and the positive impact we can have on the world.